Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep.
Find a comfortable position, settle in, and allow the gentle weight of relaxation to settle over you. Let the sounds of your world, the hustle and bustle of the day, begin to fade into the background. Tonight, our journey does not take us to the grand halls of a palace or to a sprawling ancient city.
Instead, it takes us to a small, isolated patch of earth in the quiet, rolling fields of early 20th century Bavaria.
We travel back to a time of profound change and deep-seated tradition, to a place that has been lost to time, but whose story lingers, whispered in hushed tones.
We are going to a remote farmstead, a place known as Hinterkaifeck. It is a name that means very little to most, but for those who know it, it conjures an image of deep, unsettling mystery. It is the scene of a crime so strange, so cold, and so profoundly baffling that it continues to puzzle investigators and historians a full century later. There is no need to solve this mystery tonight. Our purpose is simply to explore it, to walk through the events as they unfolded, and to understand the world in which they occurred. Let the details of the story wash over you, a gentle current to guide your mind towards rest. So, take a slow, deep breath.
Let it out gently,
And let us begin.
let us travel back through the years, to this isolated world, to the farm known as Hinterkaifeck, and to the calm, quiet days just before the storm. Segment 1. The scene and the crime, the calm world before the storm. To understand what happened at Hinterkaifeck, we must first understand the world that surrounded it. Imagine Germany in the year 1922. The Great War, a conflict that had consumed a generation, had been over for 4 years, but its long, dark shadow still lingered. The nation was grappling with economic hardship, political instability, and a collective sense of loss. In the bustling cities, change was constant and chaotic, but out in the countryside, in the heart of Bavaria, life was different. Here, the rhythm was slower, dictated not by politics, but by the seasons.
The days were marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the tilling of the soil, the planting of seeds, and the gathering of the harvest.
It was a world of hard work, deep faith, and ancient traditions.
And it is in this world that we find our farm. Hinterkaifeck was not even a village.
It was not even a hamlet. It was simply a name for a single, solitary farmstead, set about a mile from the nearest small village of Kaifeck. The name itself gives a clue to its isolation.
Hinter in German, meaning behind.
It was, in essence, the farm behind Kaifeck, tucked away, out of sight, and largely out of mind. The farm was a world unto itself.
A sturdy, two-story farmhouse, a large barn for the animals, a shed for tools and machinery.
Around it, fields stretched out, bordered by the dense, dark woods that seemed to press in from all sides. The silence here was profound, broken only by the wind moving through the trees, the distant lowing of cattle, or the cry of a lone bird. Living in this isolated world was the Grubber family. They were, by all accounts, a family that kept to themselves. The patriarch was Andreas Grubber, a man in his early 60s, known in the nearby villages as a stern and sometimes difficult man. With him lived his wife, Chilia, who was in her 70s and often in poor health. Living under the same roof was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, a woman in her mid-30s, and with Victoria were her 2 children, 7-year-old Chilia and 2-year-old Joseph. The family was relatively prosperous for the time, which, combined with their reclusive nature, made them subjects of gossip and speculation in the surrounding communities, and some of that gossip was dark. Whispers in the nearby village spoke of an improper, unnervingly close relationship between the father, Andreas, and his daughter, Victoria. These were rumors, of course, the kind that fester in small, tight-knit communities, but they added to the family's reputation for being strange, and set them apart. In the late winter of 1922, this isolated, quiet, but troubled world began to experience a series of small, unsettling events. Each one, on its own, was perhaps insignificant, a minor curiosity, but together, they painted a picture of a slow, creeping dread. Imagine, one cold March morning, Andreas Grubber wakes to a fresh, thin blanket of snow covering the ground. As he steps outside into the crisp air, he sees a single, clear set of footprints in the snow. They are the prints of heavy boots, and they led from the edge of the dense, dark forest directly to the farmhouse. He follows the line of the prints with his eyes. But what is strange, what sends a shiver of unease through him, is that there are no tracks leading back. Someone had walked out of the forest to their home and had simply vanished. He searched the property, the barn, the shed. He found nothing, no one. A few days later, another strange event. The main set of house keys, which were always kept in the same place, disappeared. The family searched everywhere, but they were gone. An inconvenience, to be sure, but in this isolated place, a locked door was a comfort. The loss of the keys felt like a small, personal violation.
A sign that their private world was no longer secure.
Then came the sounds. At night, when the farmhouse was still and dark, the family would hear it.
A faint shuffling noise.
A soft, scraping sound. A creak of floorboards from the attic directly above their bedrooms. Each time, Andreas, a man not easily frightened, would climb the ladder to the attic, lantern in hand. And each time, he would find nothing but stillness, dust motes dancing in the lamplight, and the quiet presence of stored grain and forgotten belongings.
Yet, the sounds would return on another night.
The unsettling intrusions continued. One day, a newspaper from Munich appeared on the porch. It was a paper no one in the family subscribed to, and a paper no one in the area read. It was simply there, a strange object from the outside world, left on their doorstep by an unknown hand. The sense of being watched, of an unseen presence, grew so strong that the family's previous maid had quit her job several months earlier, insisting that the house was haunted. She had spoken of footsteps, whispers, and a feeling of constant dread she could no longer endure. On the March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived.
Her name was Maria Baumgartner.
It was her very first day at Hinterkaifeck. She was brought to the farm, settled into her room, and began to learn the rhythms of this strange, secluded family.
As evening fell on that final day of March, a cold stillness settled over the farm.
The family completed their chores. The animals were fed and secured in the barn. A simple meal was likely shared in the farmhouse kitchen.
The children, Chilia and little Joseph, were put to bed.
The adults settled in for the night, perhaps discussing the strange events of the past weeks, perhaps simply sitting in the quiet, weary from a long day's work. They were unaware that the strange, unsettling events were not random occurrences, nor the work of ghosts.
They were a slow, quiet prelude, a methodical reconnaissance. They did not know that the unseen presence that had been walking their grounds, hiding in their attic, and observing their lives, was no longer content to simply watch. They did not know that the silence about to fall upon Hinterkaifeck would be absolute and eternal. The silence that began at Hinterkaifeck on that final Friday night of March extended through Saturday. The farm, usually a place of constant, rhythmic work, lay dormant. The world outside remained unaware. 7-year-old Chilia Grubber did not arrive at school. Her absence was noted, but a child missing a day of school in a rural community was not an immediate cause for alarm. The postman also noticed that the mail from the weekend had not been collected. They walked the familiar path to the farmstead, their calls echoing in the unnervingly quiet air. The family dog barked from within the barn, but it was a sound of distress. The cattle were lowing, clearly hungry and needing to be milked. It was a scene of such profound and terrible stillness that it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The search party, shaken to their core, retreated from the barn and immediately sent for the authorities. They did not yet know that the horror was not confined to the barn. Beneath a layer of disturbed hay, as if hastily covered, they found the still forms of Andreas Grubber, his wife Chilia, their daughter Victoria, and the young Chilia. In her small bedroom just off the kitchen, they found the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, and in Victoria's bedroom, in his own small cot, they found 2-year-old Joseph. Both had met the same fate as the others. The autopsies, conducted in the barn itself, confirmed that each victim had perished from crushing blows to the head, delivered with immense force. They had lived there among their victims, tending to the daily rhythms of the farm as if nothing had happened. This was not the work of a panicked thief or a fleeting madman. This was something else entirely. Something cold, methodical, and profoundly strange. The likely murder weapon was found at the scene, a mattock, a heavy farming tool similar to a pickaxe, which belonged to the Grubbers. The Grubbers were known to be wealthy, and a remote farm would be an easy target. But this simple explanation quickly crumbled. The motive was a complete mystery. Inspector Ian Gruber and his men were left with a crime scene that defied all logic. A brutal act of violence, seemingly devoid of a clear motive, committed by a phantom who had lived alongside the family, both before and after their deaths. The first threads of the investigation led not to answers, but to a deeper, more unsettling darkness. To find a motive, they would have to dig into the lives and the secrets of the Grubber family itself. During a careful search of the house, investigators found a large amount of cash, gold coins, and valuable savings bonds hidden away.
completely untouched. It was leaning against a wall in the barn, showing clear signs of its use. An entire family, 3 generations, had been extinguished. The world of the farm, so dependent on human hands, was beginning to fall apart. This was not a crime of the city.
It was a rural horror, and the Munich criminal police, the Kripo, were dispatched at once.
Chief Inspector Jorgri and Gruber, a seasoned detective, arrived at the farm the following day to take charge of a crime scene unlike any he had ever encountered. There was no sign of a struggle in the house. There was no forced entry. Whoever had done this had either been let inside, or, as the earlier strange events suggested, was already there, waiting.
The small park was a quiet testament to the stillness within the farmhouse. The evidence was undeniable.
The cattle in the barn had been fed. The killer, after committing these terrible acts on Friday night, had not immediately fled. The family dog, tied up inside, had been given food and water. In the farmhouse kitchen, a recent meal had been eaten.
Someone had been sleeping in one of the beds. Smoke had been seen coming from the chimney on Saturday.
A pair of coffee salesmen, making their rounds, approached the farm on Saturday afternoon. They called out, knocked on the door, but received no answer. Seeing no one, and finding the farm eerily still, they simply moved on, making a note to return another time. Sunday passed in the same profound quiet. And then, on Monday, April 3rd, the first concrete sign that something was amiss registered with the outside world. By Tuesday, April 4th, a subtle but growing unease had settled among the few neighbors who lived within a mile or 2 of the farm. No one had seen any of the grubbers for days. There was no smoke from the chimney, no sign of life at all. A small group of villagers was organized to investigate. It was led by a neighbor, a man named Lawrence Littenbauer. As they drew closer, the signs of neglect were obvious. The search party tried the main door of the farmhouse, but it was locked.
They moved towards the large barn, a place of work and shelter.
After managing to open one of the doors, they stepped inside. It was there, in the dim light filtering through the dusty wooden slats, amid the familiar farm scents of hay and earth, that they made the discovery. They had been arranged in the barn, one by one, in a way that spoke of a deliberate, chilling act. When the local police arrived, they entered the house to find the rest of the family. The news of the massacre at Hinterkaifeck sent a shockwave through the region. The initial investigation was a study in methodical confusion, but as Inspector Ian Gruber and his men examined the scene, a series of bizarre and deeply unsettling facts began to emerge. And then came the most chilling discovery of all. The police began to piece together a timeline that was almost too disturbing to comprehend. The killer, or killers, had stayed at the farm for the entire weekend. The initial theory, as is common in such brutal cases, was robbery. If not for money, then for what reason did this terrible event occur?
With a simple motive of robbery, discarded Inspector Ian Gruber. His investigation turned away from the physical evidence at the farm and towards the intangible world of the Gruber family's life, a world of rumor, secrets, and strained human relationships. The key to this crime, he believed, was not in what was taken from the house, but in what had been happening within its walls for years. It did not take long for investigators to uncover the family's darkest and most public secret, a fact that was already common, if whispered. Knowledge in the nearby village of Gribbern. Both Andreas and Victoria had been previously investigated, convicted, and had even served time in prison for the crime of incest. But it was Schlittenbauer's behavior at the crime scene that truly drew the suspicion of the police. Eyewitnesses reported that he seemed strangely calm, almost too comfortable amid the horror. What if Carl Gabriel had not died? What if he had survived, perhaps as a deserter, or a prisoner of war, or a man suffering from amnesia? Inspector Ian Gruber's team cast a wide net. They questioned traveling craftsmen who had recently worked at the farm, as they investigated former farmhands who may have held a grudge. The details of the crime itself seemed to argue against a stranger. The killer knew the farm's layout intimately. They knew the family's routine. Yet every path, every theory, eventually dissolved into ambiguity. The police had suspects, but no proof. They had powerful motives, but no confession. The hidden clues of the Gruber family's life had deepened the mystery, but they had failed to illuminate the face of their killer. They knew how to placate the dog and tend to the cattle, and most importantly, they possessed a chilling calmness that allowed them to live on the farm for days after the act. This all pointed away from a random encounter and back towards someone with a deep personal and perhaps twisted connection to Hinterkaifeck. They looked into vagrants and drifters who were known to pass through the area. They even considered the possibility of a madman, a killer driven by pure, motiveless rage, had spent the intervening years slowly making his way back home. Imagine this soldier returning, after nearly a decade, not to a hero's welcome, but to a farm filled with dark secrets. He would have found his wife in a relationship with a neighbor, and worse, under the thumb of her own father, with 2 children whose paternity was a source of open scandal. In this telling, the massacre at Hinterkaifeck was not a crime of greed or passion, but a terrible, calculated act of vengeance. Investigators looked into this possibility, and some of Carl Gabriel's fellow soldiers even claimed to have seen him after his supposed death. But with no body and no returning soldier to question, this too remained a speculative ghost story. He had moved the bodies before the police arrived, potentially contaminating the scene. His knowledge of the farm's layout was, of course, perfect. For years after the murders, suspicion would follow Lorenz Schlittenbauer like a shadow, but with no direct evidence. Number murder weapon linked to him, and his steadfast denial, charges were never filed. He remained a man of intense interest, a puzzle piece that never quite fit. A short list of primary suspects began to form. He was a soldier, officially reported as killed in action in the trenches of France in 1914, during the first year of the Great War. But in the chaos and carnage of that war, records were often flawed. The crucial, ambiguous detail was that his body was never recovered or identified. This grim reality, known to the community, cast a long and complicated shadow over the family, and it opened up a host of new, terrible possibilities for the investigators. Could the murders have been a crime of passion? An act of brutal jealousy from a spurned lover? Or perhaps the result of a blackmail attempt? A secret held over the family that had finally erupted into violence? This was the matter of the deeply inappropriate relationship between the patriarch, Andreas, and his widowed daughter, Victoria. This was not merely village gossip. It was a matter of legal record. With this in mind, the focus of the investigation shifted to the people who knew the family and their secrets best. The first, and for many years the most compelling, was the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, was the man who had organized and led the search party that discovered the bodies. His connection to the family was intimate and complicated. Following the reported death of Victoria's husband in the war, she and Schlittenbauer had begun a relationship. This relationship resulted in the birth of young Joseph, or at least, that was the official story. Schlittenbauer's paternity was a matter of dispute, paid maintenance for the child, but public records and local rumors suggested that Andreas Gruber had also claimed to be the father. This alone provided a powerful motive. A bitter dispute over a child, tangled with the family's other dark secrets. But another shadow from Victoria's past loomed over the investigation. The shadow of her husband, Carl Gabriel. This lingering uncertainty allowed a ghostly theory to take root. The investigation was not limited to those closest to the family, yet every one of these paths eventually grew cold, so the investigation spiraled outwards, touching dozens of lives and exploring dark possibilities, from local disputes to the long-reaching trauma of a distant war. The weeks following the initial investigation at Hinterkaifeck turned into months, and the months bled into years. The trail, which had been cold from the very start, grew colder still, freezing over with the passage of time. There was no final confrontation. There was no dramatic arrest. The story of Hinterkaifeck has no third act in the traditional sense. It is a story defined by its lack of resolution. Over the next decade, and then the decades that followed, the case files would be opened and reopened. More than 100 suspects were officially questioned in connection with the crime. That is, until 2007. When a group of students at the German Police Academy in Fürstenfeldbruck decided to take on the ultimate cold case as their graduation project. They spent months poring over the old yellowed files. They concluded that due to the passage of time, the contamination of the original crime scene, their reasoning was twofold. First, the suspect had passed away long ago, and naming them now would unfairly impact their living descendants, who bore no responsibility for the crime. Second, their conclusion, while confident, could never be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so, they closed their report with a final, tantalizing statement. They had an answer, but one that history could not officially record. A world without the constant connectivity and technology that we now take for granted, where help was miles away and where a family could vanish for days before the outside world would even notice. They did hint that their suspect was someone from the immediate area, known to the original investigators, but against whom a case could never be built. But to remind us of the countless stories that lie hidden in the quiet places of the past, let the questions of who and why drift away now. There is nothing more to solve tonight, nothing more to explore. All that remains is the gentle, quiet call of sleep. Let the chilling details soften and drift away. The purpose was not to solve the puzzle, but simply to hear the story, and now the story is told. In the destruction of evidence, the case could never be definitively solved in a court of law. A name may be identified in a modern report, but a ghost will never be officially brought to justice. The murders at the small Bavarian farm remain one of history's most chilling and compelling examples of a darkness that came from the woods, acted with brutal precision, and vanished back into the quiet of the trees, leaving only questions behind. However, through their methodical process of elimination and profiling, they did come to a consensus on a single primary suspect. They believe they know who did it. For the community, it was a place of unbearable horror, a scar on the landscape they could no longer endure. The farmhouse, the barn where the family had met their end, the tool shed, all were torn down. The wood was salvaged or burned, the foundations were filled in, and the land was plowed over. We have walked through the unsettling quiet that preceded the crime, feeling the unease of footprints in the snow and sounds in the attic. We have stood with the investigators as they tried to make sense of the senseless, and we have explored the dark, tangled relationships that may have held the key. Soon grass and wildflowers grew where the blood-soaked buildings once stood. All that remained was the story. With the farm gone, the physical heart of the mystery was erased from the landscape. The net was cast wide, entangling neighbors with grudges, jilted lovers, mysterious strangers, and even family members. In the absence of facts, speculation and legend took root. Hinterkaifeck became a name synonymous with a kind of deep, rural terror. It became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told on dark nights about the dangers of isolation, the poison of family secrets, and the chilling possibility that a killer could walk among you. Tend your animals and eat your bread before vanishing back into the forest. But every interrogation led to a denial. Every new lead, every promising theory, eventually led to a dead end. The perfect, brutal crime remained perfectly, frustratingly unsolved. In 1923, just over a year after the murders, the decision was made to demolish the farmstead. And what a story it became. For nearly 85 years, the case lay dormant in the police archives. A thick file filled with questions but no answers. Using investigative techniques unimaginable in 1922 criminal profiling, modern forensic analysis of the documents, and a systematic revaluation of every piece of evidence, they brought a 21st century lens to the 20th century crime. Their final report was both fascinating and frustrating, but they did not and will not publicly reveal the name. And so, the Hinterkaifeck case rests in this strange state of being both solved and unsolved. Our journey tonight has taken us to a lonely place, a small farm that no longer exists, and into the heart of a mystery that has endured for a century. The story of Hinterkaifeck is a reminder of a world that was both harder and more vulnerable than our own. As you lie here now in the safety and comfort of your own space, let the echoes of that distant, troubled world begin to fade. And now, rest. Some mysteries are not meant to be fully unraveled. They become part of our history, lingering, not to frighten. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. Good night.